Chair for UAE branch. On behalf of my committee and IOSH, I welcome you to this great event. Before we start the ground rules, please mute your mic, and if it is required, then myself or the speaker will definitely notify you. If you got any questions, anything, please write down in the chat box, and the communication coordinator, Asif Ali, will take it to the speaker at the end of the session. The event will be recorded for the purposes to share it later on, those who have missed this event. Before we start, or before I invite it to Haithar, our speaker, I would like to all of you to keep your mic muted along with me. Also, a 1 minute silence in order to present condolences to the royal family on the sad demises of Queen Elizabeth. So our time started now. Please mute your mic. Welcome back, and thank you very much to everyone. So without wasting your time, I would like to invite our speaker. The subject is really interesting, which is Introduction to the Positive Psychology. And I would like to invite Haithar. Haithar, the platform is yours. Please give us fruitful things in order to make our evening an entertainment one, with lots of information, and I believe you got it because I have attended it previously and it's really interesting. So thanks for having you here.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you. It's a real privilege to be here with you today. I'm really excited to spend an hour with you talking, or 45 minutes talking about positive psychology. And I have altered this presentation slightly because normally it's one that I give to individuals to help them manage their own resilience. And we are doing that, but we're also going to look at its relevance to safety professionals and how positive psychology as a discipline is useful to health and safety, as well as to us as individuals. Just a brief introduction to me. I've had 30 years working in health and safety. I started by selling the first information service available on CD-ROM, as it was, which was all the health and safety executives' information in full text. And then I moved to Barber. I don't know if any of you remember Barber Index. There was a microfiche. None of you are old enough to remember that. And I also then ran Safety and Health Expo, the IOSH conference, and Safety and Health Practitioner magazine. And then I decided about 6 or 7 years ago that I wanted to run my own business, and I wanted to run my own business in well-being, because I'm really interested in how human beings navigate their way through life, being as happy as they possibly can be in spite of what life throws at us. So I started a master's in applied positive psychology. I've also studied some organizational theories, and I recently also qualified to be a lead implementer in British Standards 45001, not so that I could help organizations in 45001, but so that I could help them with 45003. So that is something that I think is really changing the approach to well-being in organizations, is 45003. We've been fortunate over the last 5 or 6 years to work with some very large organisations, UK based in the main, but increasingly global organisations now that we can do things over the internet. So what is positive psychology, first and foremost? So when psychology first came about as a discipline, it was looking at two things. It was looking at how to heal the ill, those that were mentally ill, but it was also looking at how, as human beings, we actually make the best of this one life that we have and stay as mentally healthy as possible. And then during World War II, after the aftermath of that, there were so many mental illness issues that psychology became focused entirely on mental illness, on healing the ill, rather than on improving the healthy and making sure that the healthy stayed healthy. And so in 1998, Martin Seligman became the head of the American the American Psychological Association, and he launched the idea of positive psychology. So it's a relatively new discipline, but it asks questions like, what makes a life worth living? How are some people happy despite suffering? What is the essence of happiness and well-being? And can this be learnt and taught to others? So that's really what positive psychology is all about. Is it is it actually a legitimate field of study? Well, let's have a look at that as a criticism. So a lot of what it deals with would have been dealt with by philosophy in the past. So a lot of what we look at in positive psychology actually goes back to the Greeks. It goes back to Stoicism, for example, Greek and Roman times. And but what we do with that study is we now research as far as we can objectively what difference those interventions make in somebody's life in order to make them happier. So in the past, I guess these were theories, but now they are theories with application, where we look at how to apply them in people's lives and whether it does actually make them happier if we do. However, obviously, happiness, mental health, they are all subjective. There is no blood test that will tell me whether I'm happy or not. It's all my subjective experience. And so that is, it's not something we can measure in an empirical way as we can with other sciences potentially. And then there are the criticisms which say, how can I quantify happiness? How can I say, whether I'm happy or not? And there are cultural differences. What we regard as happy in the UK, there may be different ideas that you have in the UAE, for example. And some of the research that has taken place, it conflicts. So, for example, do you need money to be happy? And some research shows that actually there's a certain amount which makes you happier, and in other cases it looks at the fact that actually too much can make you unhappy. And then there's other research that says that actually the more you have, the happier you are. So there's a lot of conflicting analysis in a lot of these areas. And actually, the research that I'm going to present to you today, the 3 interventions that we're going to look at specifically, are very much agreed upon. So there isn't really conflicting research in these areas. So I've particularly picked these out as being areas which are very much agreed upon as good things to do, which make people happier. Another criticism of positive psychology is that it focuses too much on the individual. And as you probably know, in the Western world, very much coming out of the United States of America, we very much focus on individualism. And actually, this can absolve our institutions. So how easy is it to be happy when there's huge inequality in your country? When, for example, as many people in the UK are right now, you're visiting a food bank because you can't afford to help your family feed themselves. How easy is it to be happy in those circumstances? And the criticism of positive psychology is it focuses on just you be happy with your own life and don't focus on institutions. In fact, positive psychology, when it first started, was also focused on institutions. A lot of work has been done in universities to establish how you make a happy university, how you make a happy academic institution. And then there's this idea that positivity can become a bit of a tyranny. We always have to find the bright side. And actually, we go through some things in life which are not good and are not easy. And actually acknowledging that and acknowledging that sometimes we need to be sad is really something which is a latter idea from positive psychology. So it's not something that was originally researched. Originally, it was a lot to do with, you know, looking at things in a positive light. And now it's a lot more about understanding that life is full of light and dark. So let's have a look at one of the things which came out of positive psychology, which was the World Happiness Index. So this attempts to explain which countries in the world are the happiest. And I'm happy to announce that Saudi Arabia has advanced one position to 25th in this year's World Happiness Report. And a lot of the countries which come to towards the top tend to be the Nordic countries, where there is quite a strong state intervention, where because people trust in their institutions and know that they will be looked after, they tend to be in the main happier. But then there is the point that we need to consider, which is happiness. Ideas of happiness will differ from nation to nation. So we need to always have some healthy skepticism when we look at a report like this. So how does positive psychology work? Well, have you ever tried to build a new habit? Have you ever tried to say, for example, right, I am now going to be someone who exercises, or be someone who doesn't eat so much, or be someone who's kind to other people? It's like building a muscle. And it's really, so it works on the idea of neuroplasticity. So the fact that our brains are not fixed, we can actually change our paths of thinking and actually rewire our brain for greater happiness by using these interventions again and again, so that we build a habit in some of them. So when we look at something like gratitude, where there is a lot of research, if we build a habit of being grateful, we will literally find more things to be grateful for, which in turn will make us happier. So it actually takes the theory, which we know is true, that our brains can literally rewire themselves if we become habitual about something, as opposed to if we have a habit for complaining, we will find that we have more and more things to complain about. That neural pathway in our brain will become fixed, that we become someone who complains. Whereas if we can perhaps be more intentional about it and think about things like, I want to be someone who's grateful, we can build a habit for gratitude, which will be encouraged by the more we do it. So let's think about individual well-being to start with. As we go forward in this, I'm going to look at its relevance to health and safety as well as a discipline. But let's think about positive psychology and how it's relevant to us as individuals. The first piece of the puzzle is self-awareness. Know thyself, and to thine own self be true, said Socrates. So trying to understand what makes us happy is the first piece of the puzzle. There's a famous positive psychologist called Csikszentmihalyi, and he said that the recipe for happiness cannot be copied from one individual to another. Every single one of us is unique. So understanding what makes us tick, what makes us happy, is important, because what makes me happy may not be the same as what makes you happy. But try some of these interventions for yourself. We're going to give you 3 today to have a look at. And if you think about, actually, I think this could be relevant to me, let me try it out. And then I'll be interested to hear how you get on. I'm going to give you my email address at the end. And if you'd like to have a go and then tell me that really worked for me or that didn't work at all, I'll be very interested to hear. So these are just some of the interventions which are being studied in this new science of positive psychology, looking at how kindness improves our happiness. You will all, I'm sure, have heard about mindfulness, which is, you know, meditation and being in the now, trying to actually, you know, feel your feet on the ground, not be distracted. There's a huge amount of research going on in that field, which shows that it has huge benefits to us. Human connection, and we're going to look a little bit at that when we look at empathy, because that also has a huge amount of relevance to resilience, for example. Spirituality, optimism, positive emotion, savoring things. So that first cup of coffee in the morning, or whatever your first drink of choice is, mine's coffee, having a real proper smell of that and appreciating it, noticing that beautiful sunset and really drinking it in, or really savoring that moment with your children. For example, I really noticed that the other night. I was sat there with my dog and my daughter, and I thought, I am so lucky to be sitting here right now in this place with these two beings, and just noticing those things, really savoring them, feeling lucky. Those are things which will make you happier. So these are all things which are being studied in positive psychology. And today, what we're going to look at is 3 of those interventions which have been researched. And there's a lot of research on these. So we're looking at using your strengths and how that is relevant to happiness. We're looking at empathy. We're looking at gratitude. And then we're also going to look at why chasing happiness may not work. And we'll look at this new field of positive psychology, which is called Positive Psychology 2.0. Just like safety, we have Safety 2.0, don't we? We have Positive Psychology 2.0. There's always a 2.0 wherever you go. And finally, we're going to have a look at the relationship between positive psychology and health and safety, which I hope will be of relevance to all of you guys. Mushtaq, you've raised your hand. Do pop a comment in the chat box, and I will have a look, see if I can answer you straight away. Oh, so somebody can't hear me, but I'm hoping that that will have been resolved by now. And thank you to everyone who says good day and good afternoon. If you want to, I've got the chat box open, so if you want to pop a comment in there, or you want to ask a question, please feel free to do so, and I'll try and answer you as I go. Right, let's have a look at strengths. There is an enormous amount of research into this area, which says that if we use our strengths, those things that we're good at, on a regular basis, we will be happier. Now, that runs counter to what we thought in the past. So what we thought in the past was that we need to work on our weaknesses at all costs. So you've all probably had a performance appraisal where you've sat in front of your boss, and your boss has said to you, you need to work on this weakness and this weakness and this weakness. And we almost feel that there's a moral value in working on our weaknesses. Have you considered that actually you're better to work more on your strengths? So find a stretch or a challenge associated with your strength, and then do more of that. So for me, for example, prior to starting my business, I did a little analysis of what I thought my strengths were. And I decided that I was going to build as many of those into my future work as possible. Because the work that I was doing before, I had some things in there which played to my strengths, and some things that I was really bad at. And I really didn't enjoy doing them. And some things I just had to get good enough at, for example, budgeting and financial management. We all have to be good at financial management, no matter what we do. I had to get good enough at that, but I focused my business on the things that I was really good at, and created a bit of a stretch and a challenge. So I do a lot of work in new areas constantly. So somebody recently asked me to write a talk about neurodiversity, and I researched neurodiversity over 3 months. I read lots of books, and I wrote a session about that, because that is, I enjoy this, I'm good at it, and the research gives me that stretch and that challenge. So thinking about your what you're good at. Now, this started with Aristotle. Aristotle made a link between using your strengths and virtue. He believed that your character strengths, if you use them, you would become virtuous. And if you look at the strengths on the side of the screen there, they are very much related to virtue, aren't they? You've got fairness, you've got self-regulation, and not always easy to see how we can apply these to work. So there are other models of strengths which actually are more applicable to work. But if you're interested, if you just do a Google on VIA strengths, that is spelt there, VIA strengths, you'll find out what your strengths are in order. And it's a free test that you can run for yourself. And you might find, for example, that zest or creativity or leadership or spirituality are key strengths for you. And then think about, how much do I use those in my day-to-day life? So the more you can use them, and with a slight stretch or challenge involved, the happier you will be. There were other people that got involved in this study of strengths. Clifton and Gallup, you may have heard of Gallup. They are always doing surveys and questionnaires. And they have created a strength survey in this area too. And it's actually quite a nice one to do. If you're interested in knowing whether you're using your strengths at work, the Gallup one is a good one to use. It costs about £25. I don't know how much that is in your money, but it's not too much money, but it helps you to think about what work strengths do I have? And they argued that it's not true that anyone can learn to be competent in almost anything. Certainly in the Western world, we have this view that you can be anything you want to be. You can do anything you want to do. And Clifton argued that that just isn't true, that actually we have strengths in certain areas and other areas we're just weak in. And actually we're much better to focus on our strengths than trying to build our weaknesses. And Linley is another researcher in this area. He's written a book called Average to A+, and he says that natural talent is a necessary but not sufficient condition for a strength. So if you are, it isn't just being good at something, it's when it's energizing as well. It's when you do that thing and you feel energy coming from it. So for example, if you have a strength in relationships and you go out and you spend a lot of time networking and building, communication with people, and you find that energizing, then that is definitely a strength. But if you're good at it, but you don't really enjoy it, you don't really get much energy from it, then he says it's a learned behavior, not a true strength. So it's links to flow. So this was so strengths are were talked about again by Csikszentmihalyi, who I mentioned earlier. Csikszentmihalyi was the one who said that the recipe for happiness cannot be copied from individual to individual. So what he said in his book Flow, which is a really, really good book, by the way, if you're interested in knowing more about positive psychology, I'd recommend this book called Flow. He said that when we are fully engrossed in something which we're good at and we get energy from, and we have some challenge or stretch involved in it, we are not even conscious of time passing. You might know this. Just pop in the box if you know, I find this in my work, or I find this in a particular hobby or something that I do outside of work. If you can think of any area where you're in flow, you're not even aware that time's passing, you lose your sense of self in it, and it's basically something where you are transcending yourself. So we've got a question coming in. What is actually what's actual challenge to achieve positive psychology, personal life or professional life? So positive psychology is relevant to both your personal life and your professional life. It goes through everything. Thank you for the question. And Bernadette, thank you for saying crafting. That's often people find their flow in their hobbies, not always in their work. But it doesn't matter where you find it, as long as you have it somewhere in your life. It's a state of, this is what Csikszentmihalyi says, a state of joy, creativity, and total involvement, which requires a balance of skills and challenge. So the more we are working within our strengths with a slight challenge or stretch involved, the happier we will be. So how do we do this, work this out for ourselves? So first of all, think about, what am I good at? When I decided to change my career, I did a bit of an audit. I just thought, what do I think I'm good at? And I asked my friends. I didn't know about the VIA Strengths Profile at that point, but you can use a test. You could use the Gallup test or the Clifton test or the VIA Strengths test to find out what you think you're really good at, what you really enjoy doing. And then, what did you enjoy as a child? Think about that. Were you somebody that, always enjoyed reading and researching, and you maybe don't get much of a chance to do that anymore? What do you naturally gravitate to on your to-do list? Are you using these at work or at play? And then often your flow is to be found in your hobbies rather than your work. Can you find a way of incorporating those strengths into your work or your play? what I did was a series of micro experiments. So I thought that actually I might be quite good at writing and I might be quite good at public speaking, but I hadn't really had an opportunity to try. So I built some micro experiments into my work to allow myself to try these things out to see, was I right that actually I was good at these, I would get energy from these. So thinking about how you can build some experimentation into your work or into your home life, into your hobbies, to actually pick some things up which actually are you'll really enjoy and are really good at, and that they will enable you to be happier. Right, the second area we're going to look at is the idea of empathy. So individual well-being is improved by empathy. So what is empathy? Well, you probably come across it before, right? But let's look at these three types of empathy that we are looking at here. The first one is cognitive empathy, which is also known as perspective taking. So that refers to our ability to understand and see another person's emotions. It doesn't mean we feel those emotions. It means that we can understand them. We can put ourselves into that person's shoes and we can understand why they're feeling the way they're feeling. Emotional empathy is when you physically and emotionally feel what the other person is experiencing. Perhaps you've been talking to somebody, telling them a problem, and you find that they get tearful listening to you. That's called, it's almost like a contagion. It's almost like emotional contagion. And then compassionate empathy enables us to not only understand and feel what another person's going through, but also the ability to actually want to help that individual. So all three types are valid, but any one of those is useful in a given circumstance. And why does that make a difference to us as individuals? Because we can see it makes a difference to another person if we can empathize with them. But why does it help us in our own quest to be happy? Well, having empathy enables us to build social connections. It enables us to build those real intimate relationships with other people around us. And we know that having those relationships with other people will enable us to feel much more resilient. It is probably the strongest evidence for resilience comes around human connection. So we know that, for example, if we are going through difficult times, connecting with other people is the strongest way of supporting us out of those issues. Building strong connections in our lives can increase our feelings of happiness and self-worth. And it also can enable us to have lower levels of anxiety and depression. So empathy helps us to build social connections, which in turn build our happiness and our resilience. So we've had a question from Mohammed. Can you brief the relationship between psychology, positive psychology and safety in short? Yes, we will most certainly look at that towards the end. That's the last topic I'm going to look at. How do you motivate colleagues who have lost all their family due to the pandemic? How do you help them to get back to the desire to work? That's a really, really difficult question and a really useful one. I think we're going to look at that more towards the end as well, Andrew, but we may come back to that depending on how much I feel I've covered it. Thank you for that. So we've just looked at empathy, right? We are now going to look at gratitude, which is the third element of this. So gratitude, we know there is a huge amount of research around gratitude, and it has irrefutable relevance to both the understanding and development of well-being and life satisfaction. So if we notice things to be grateful for, the more we become grateful. It's like that neuroplasticity I talked to you about earlier, wherein if we build a habit for something, we notice more of that. So building a habit for being grateful for what we actually have right now, right here, actually enables us to feel more grateful for, to notice more things to be grateful for. So I'm just going to talk to you about how to do this. But if you're interested in more research on the gratitude's effect on the brain, there's a research paper at the bottom there from Zahn, Garrido, Moll and Grafman. But there is a huge amount of research that shows that being grateful for what we already have actually literally rewires our brain to be happier, and that the benefits accrue over time. So the more we do this, the more we are happier, the more things that we find to be grateful for. So how do we do this? How do we do this? Well, you might have heard of people keeping gratitude journals, and that is certainly one way of doing it. So that is where every night before you go to bed, you think about 3 things to be grateful for that you've noticed, that you know that you want to be grateful for, that you've seen during the day, or something which has happened during the day, or just having that feeling of, I am so lucky to be where I am right now. So you might use a gratitude journal for that. Or you might not. You might just notice those good things, look for them and appreciate them, save and absorb them, and really pay attention to those good things. We tend to, because our brains are wired to notice negative things, we tend to focus much more on those negative things than we do on the positive things. So, for example, we might focus on the fact that, I don't know, we don't like our job right now and our job is not good. But we focus on that at the expense of, I have a lovely family, I have a beautiful house, I have a life with lots of friendships, lots of love in it. So it's focusing in on those things that are good, that we can be grateful for, and savoring them. I mentioned earlier about, looking at my daughter and my dog and thinking, I'm really, really lucky and happy to have those people here right now, this moment in time. Perhaps you're on holiday and you're really appreciating the moment. It's just bringing ourselves into those moments and thinking, actually, I am lucky. I'm very lucky to have all of the things that I have. And then express your gratitude to yourself. You can write it down, or you can actually thank somebody. And we're going to talk about the relevance to safety in a moment, because I think this is really where health and safety and positive psychology come together very much, is around this theme of gratitude as well. So we're going to look now at one of the problems for human beings of searching for happiness. We tend to think that our life should be focused on happiness, but we look for happiness in the wrong places. We look for it, we think, I will be happy when. So I will be happy when, my children leave home and I have a bit less stress, or I will be happy when I retire, or I will be happy when I get that new car, or I get that promotion that I've been looking for, or I get to move countries, or whatever it may be. We are very, very bad at appreciating what we have right now. And we tend to live into the future and think, I will be happy when these things happen. But we're looking often for happiness in the wrong places. And we don't understand our brains well enough. We've got a supercomputer in our heads, and that supercomputer is actually wired for our survival. So it's wired to ensure that we eat everything that's in front of us so that we don't go starving. It is wired to release dopamine for pleasure when we get those immediate hits. It's wired to enable us to escape a saber-toothed tiger by releasing stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, when we feel that we're threatened, even though the threats that we have these days are generally not to our survival. They're generally just to what might happen in the future. So we're kind of working against our own natural instincts sometimes, and actually understanding ourselves, understanding what makes us tick, understanding the way our brains work is really important as we move forward into what are increasingly uncertain and difficult times for us. So really trying to learn about this is important for managing ourselves moving forward. Our brains are not, as I said, not necessarily built to support happiness. Let's look at just one example of that. Our brains are wired to detect threat in the environment. So they were wired to notice that thing in the undergrowth, that threat that might come forward, which means that we are focused in on that threat. So we tend to look at things negatively rather than positively. And that's a survival instinct. So you can see from the image there that all those good things, and actually we're focusing in on that one bad thing. I don't know if you've ever had feedback from anybody and maybe they've said lots of good things, but they've said one bad thing. What thing is it that you focus in on? It's that one bad thing, isn't it? And that's the way our brains are wired. It leads to the negativity bias. And unless we're aware of that and we're aware of what our brains do, it can lead to rumination, which is when we overthink a problem, or the chain of catastrophe, when we think that will happen and then that will happen and then I'm going to lose my house, I'm going to be homeless. And that's where we can end up if we don't manage ourselves better. And the way to manage that sort of thing is to understand that's just the way my brain is wired. Let me think about all the good things and let me focus in on those more than I'm focusing on that one negative thing. Another thing that our brains do to us is, you know, we get that thing that we wanted. We look for that. We want that car. We get that car. We strive for that car. We obtain it. We enjoy it for a little bit, and then we adapt to having that car, and we actually want the next car up, and then we end up on what we call the hedonic treadmill. So this is a very human instinct again, which is to constantly be looking for the next thing and not to be happy with what we have right now, and to think I will be happy when I get that thing. We get that thing and then we want the next thing, and then we want the next thing, and then we want the next thing. It's just the way we operate. So being aware of that, being aware that that's our brain survival instincts, and we maybe can override that if we're actually a bit more mindful about things, is helpful. Let's think about what happiness actually means as well. Well, there are 99 different ways to measure it and lots of different ideas about what it is. But what I'm going to just give you are the two of the key aspects of happiness, which are kind of argued over. And this is the idea of subjective well-being, which is I feel happy right now. I have a friend in front of me. I'm going out for dinner. We're laughing. I've got things going my way. I'm feeling happy, and that is called hedonic happiness, which is increased pleasure and decreased pain lead to happiness. Now, if that were the only route through, we would all find a way to just do as little as possible, lie on a beach and just enjoy ourselves all the time, wouldn't we? But there's this other side to us, which is the requirement for long-term life satisfaction, which actually comes through growth. It comes through having meaning and purpose in our lives, which may come through pain. We all know we've been through a very difficult period over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of pain in that period. And actually, some of us have learned more about ourselves and know what's important to us in life. We've grown through having those experiences. So it's balancing the two things out. So balancing the long-term life satisfaction, which may come through pain, with hedonic happiness. I'm happy in the moment right now. I'm feeling good. So those two aspects are what we're trying to balance. I said we have a positive psychology 2.0, just like we have a safety 2.0. And what positive psychology 2.0 looks at is the idea of the fact that life is full of light and dark. You know, it's not always going to be perfect, and we can find meaning in our suffering. Viktor Frankl wrote a famous book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he wrote it having been in a concentration camp. And he said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Positives can't exist apart from negatives. So if we didn't understand what suffering looked like, we wouldn't understand what happiness looks like. And positive psychology 2.0 says that authentic happiness can only grow from pain and suffering. So that's one of the reasons why it's not a bad thing to suffer. And we have a sense of purpose, can keep us motivated, give us pride in what we produce, encourages us to meet challenges head on, and acts as a buffer against pressure and stress. So it looks at this duality in life, that it's not perfect. It's okay to struggle, and we are all going to struggle from time to time. And embracing the light and dark of life brings bittersweet. Both of my parents died last year, and I can at the same time be happy and grateful for their lives and for the impact they had on me, and be really sad that they're gone. And those two emotions can coexist within me. So understanding that these things can coexist is part of this idea of the duality of life. We're going to look briefly at positive psychology and the safety profession. So we've looked at individually how positive psychology can make a difference to us as an individual. But now let's look at the safety profession. So we're going to look at safety 2, like positive psychology 2. We're going to look at safety culture, and we'll consider each of those interventions and their relevance to the safety profession. So safety is usually measured by the absence of negatives, isn't it? It's usually measured by we're successful because we haven't had any LTIs, or, we're heading for zero harm or something like that. But you will have heard, I'm sure, of safety differently, safety 2, where we look more at some of the positives. So we look at appreciative investigation techniques, which comes directly from the science of positive psychology, where we look at things that are going well. So how can we look at what's going well and learn from that? So where are areas where we do have really positive stories to tell, and can we look at what happens in that area? And then understanding that, can we then build that in to some other areas and learn from success as well as learning from failure? Where can we measure positives in our safety culture? Where can we present our board some positive statistics as well as the negative ones, the absence of negatives? So can we look at engagement? How many people attended a training session, for example, or engagement with a new safety initiative? Do we have high levels of hazard reporting, which we can say actually there's really high psychological safety in this site because people are prepared to report hazards when they see them? Incident investigation, does it happen fast and honestly, and are we learning from it? Have we got good work-life balance on this site? Are we embracing openness, and how does teamwork function? These are all things that we are positive in terms of our safety culture that we can look at appreciatively. When it comes to strengths, I guess my question in here is, and I'm really interested in your answers on this. I can see I've got 5 messages in the chat box. Yeah, leading indicators, Bernadette. Exactly, that's what I would say they were. So please just pop in the chat box. What strengths do you think are required for the modern health and safety professional? Are they different to the strengths that we needed in the past? I certainly think they are. I think that we are looking at a very different type of profession to one that I learned about 30 years ago. Yes, I agree. Selling skills, influencing skills, absolutely, 100%. Engaging, can you engage people? Deepak, that's a great point. Resilience, you do need to be resilient. Leadership skills, absolutely. This is very different, isn't it? This is very different from the technical skill set that we thought we needed in the past. Visible leadership, says Stephen. That's a great point. Yes, definitely. Communication skills, is Mohammed. Yes. So really think about that and think, are these your strengths? Or are you actually, or are there still technical roles, for example? There are different roles in health and safety, aren't there now? Are there roles within the profession which you would be better suited to? Or are you somebody who can embrace this engagement, this influencing, this integrity? Great, Deepak. Ownership skills, your own safety attitude. Yes. Positive psychology is due to positive safety culture and vice versa. Yes, I think that's a really good point. Yes. Approachable, Bernadette. Great point. Yeah, absolutely. All of these things are strengths that are needed from the modern health and safety professional. So how do you tie up with those? Can you get better at those? Are they things which actually you get strength and energy from, or do you feel that actually that's not really you? So Andrew says, I think we're dealing with interesting times, a lot of working from home. People need to learn how to handle work online, health and safety online, maybe. Yeah, Andrew, I agree. You know, we learned a lot during the pandemic, didn't we, about boundaries, about, for example, when we stop work and things like that. But I think hybrid working presents a whole wealth of new challenges, which we really haven't got to grips with. And I think we're tired as well. You know, we had to be so innovative during the pandemic, and actually we are not so we're not so innovative. We're not, you know, we're tired of that now. Ashar says data analytics, and I think that's really interesting because data analytics generally doesn't go hand in hand with someone who's approachable and, you know, all of those other things. So maybe there are areas within the profession where you say, actually, this is where my strength lies and this is where I want to be. This is where I want to be focusing my energy. It's a great point, Ashar. Thank you. And yeah, Bernadette, energy is important too. So where does gratitude fit into health and safety? Well, I am certainly not reaching here. This is a really important one. We know that one of the best ways of getting people on side is to recognize safe behavior and reward it. I think one of the best safety professionals I've ever been out with, I went out on the bins with Biffa, so up in Manchester, and the safety professional there stopped the guys and said, I'm so pleased to see that the two of you are you're both in the van, one of you's around the back, you're basically managing this together and you're doing such a great job, really well done, I'm so happy to see this. And expressing and feeling gratitude then enables those strong interpersonal connections, which we've just said, we've seen from the chat box, are so important for the health and safety professional. You want to be that guy that people like, or that woman that people like. They want to, you know, talk to them about, you know, I'm worried, I don't think this is quite safe, or I've noticed this hazard. You know, you need to be in that approachable and likable. And the more you can express gratitude towards people, they'll feel lifted, you'll feel lifted as well. So gratitude and safety go hand in hand for sure. And then finally, where does empathy in health and safety take us? Well, I think it's absolutely critical. If we're going to move from a profession which is focused on compliance, complying to rules, to one which is focusing on engagement, you know, that is where we need to be showing empathy with people. We need to understand why they're doing what they're doing. You will all, I'm sure, have heard of curious why questions, you know. Oh, that's really interesting. Why are you doing work like that? Oh, because you don't have that. Ah, right. Okay. Why is that? And just being really curious and trying to put yourself in their shoes where they're just trying to get the job done as quickly and easily as possible. And that's where empathy comes in from a safety professional. That will bring you the engagement which we're so seeking as health and safety professionals now. Right, that is the end of what I have to say, and I know that we've got some questions in there. These are sorts of things that I work with. I work with safety professionals. I've built influencing skills programs, and I've run those with people like Lang O'Rourke and Biffa. I work with safety professionals on their stress risk assessments, and I work with senior teams on 45,003, running wellbeing strategy sessions, stress risk assessments, with middle managers on their wellbeing conversation skills, and with your employees on things like this. I run a program called Managing Stress, Uncertainty and Worry. I manage one on positive psychology, one on avoiding burnout. So we have lots of different pieces of content that we can offer as Lunch and Learns to you. But I am really interested to hear from you, to hear if you try any of these for your own life. If you try, for example, looking at your strengths and then establishing how much of that you're using, and is that something that works for you? Or if you try gratitude, if you can think at the end of the day of those three things to be grateful for, or trying to lean into those areas which actually are really working for you. Or if you try appreciative investigation as opposed to always measuring the negatives or the absence of negatives in your profession. I'm really interested in hearing from you. So please do take a note of my email address if you're interested in sharing. I'm going to have a look, see if I can answer some of those questions which came in.
Thank you very much, Heather. Indeed, a very comprehensive presentation. Yeah, we have a couple of questions. Most of the question you already answered in your presentation. However, we have a couple of questions. We have one question that our brain are, as you in the presentation, as you said, our brains are wired with to detect threat. Is it overthinking or a way to figure the right action about anything?
So naturally our brains notice the threat in the environment. That's the first thing. Okay, so that means that we will notice negative things more than we'll notice positive things. And then when we notice that negative thing, the trick is to relate to that in the right way. The trick is to notice that's one negative thing. Can I learn from that negative thing? Or was that person just having a bad day? And actually, can I focus in on the positive things as well? Because if I don't do that, I'm likely to go down a rabbit hole. So the rabbit hole I'm likely to go down is overthinking, as you said, Munira. So thinking about, well, if they said that, maybe what they mean is X, Y, and Z, or actually, what does that? And actually, then you might go round and round and round in circles. And this is how anxiety starts. When we start to catastrophize, we think that everything's going to go awful, going to go wrong at the end of the day. But it's a great question, Munira. I hope I answered it for you there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have one more question with a scenario that on every working site, supervisor and foreman pushes the worker to accomplish daily task without caring safety factors. How can we reset the mind of these seniors?
Sorry, what was that one again? Was that something about, could you just repeat
Peer
that
pressure,
for me?
yeah. How to reduce the peer pressure?
How to, got it. Zahir's question there. On every working site, supervisor and foreman pushes the work to accomplish daily tasks without caring safety. How can we set the mind of these senior? So Zahir, this is really, really difficult and really key. The first thing to do is to understand their motivation. So their motivation is presumably performance. They want everybody to perform at all costs. So where is for them the why would they care? So if it's about, it could be about morality, it could be about actually not wanting to cause illness to somebody. It could be about wanting to win awards. It could be about the fact that actually, if there are people, it could be as cold as if there are people off, then they're not going to be able to complete the job as fast. But trying to understand the motivation of that person and then speaking to that motivation is one of the keys to influencing. And then thinking about how they like to be communicated with. So some of us like facts and figures, some of us like, motivational talks, some of us like to be told what to do. So thinking about that in those individuals and what their motivating factors are. But when you're talking about supervisors and foremen, that will ultimately come from the top, won't it? It will come from your board and your senior managers. So getting them on side first and foremost is the first place to do. But it's not easy. It's a lifelong struggle, this here, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. We have one more question from Andrew. How do you motivate colleagues who have lost all their family due to pandemic? How do you help them and get back to their desire to work?
It's a really, really great question. I feel really, really, it's a really difficult one. And I think the first thing is that you need to understand and give them that time that they need to be able to recover before you try to give them the same work as they had before. You might want to look at what we call reasonable adjustments, so getting them back to do different work or a smaller amount of work, but being there, empathetic and listening. So allowing them to speak about how they're feeling, being a friend to them. I think, wanting them, it's almost like, actually they're going to come back if they feel like that's where they belong and that's where they're really cared for. So if you can really care for those individuals and help them back in the best way for them, then hopefully you'll get them on side for a long time to come as well.
We have one last question, not the least, can you tell us the difference between safety and psychology?
The difference between safety and psychology?
Yeah.
Well, psychology is something which is used within safety, isn't it? So, I mean, and we might use positive psychology. We might use just an understanding of how people tick. We need to understand. We need to understand individuals before we can influence them, and that's where psychology comes in.
Thank you very much. That's it from my side. Sayed, the platform is yours. Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, everyone, sparing your time participating in the event. I think we have touched about 110 attendees. This registration was great, 200 plus. So thank you, everyone, once again, and thank you, Heather. And two things would like to add here before we wind up. One is the recording will be available. The certificates will be issued to those who has fulfilled the requirement of the session, which is 40 minutes, not less than 40 minutes. The last but not the least, there will be a survey for this event, and please feel free to share your inputs and to make these things more valuable for everybody and for everyone. Once again, thank you very much. So, Aitha, you want to say anything before I wind up?
No, just thank you so much. It was such a privilege to be here with you today. The IOSH branches are the absolute lifeblood of IOSH, and I'm really privileged to be able to be here with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.